Week 15 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking this week. The first guy, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers, a CMC. Each week, he's pretty much locked in at this number one position. Great matchup at the Arizona Cardinals, and he's head and shoulders above all the running backs in fantasy points this season. Number two, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. Kamara up in a PPR machine this season. A lot of catches out of the backfield. In between the tackles, he's explosive. Jamal Williams, he really hasn't been a factor this season since Kamara came back to the lineup after the early year suspension. And this week with a good matchup versus the New York Giants, where they've had trouble all season with the run. I think Kamara goes out there and has a great game. Number three, Kyren Williams of Los Angeles Rams. So Kyren Williams, it's been a great return for him after missing 4 games with his ankle injury. He returned the last 3 weeks, and he's putting up monster fantasy points and a lot of yards. And this week in a great matchup versus the Washington Commanders. I know people might think Kyren Williams is a little bit high on this list, but he's a running back that's explosive. He's getting 85-90% of the touches per game in that backfield. And with a great matchup in this Ram offense really opening up since he returned. Once again, I think he has a big game. Number 4, Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. The Saquon Barkley, the games he's played this season, he's been solid for the most part. The workhorse obviously over there as well, getting 90-95% of the touches in the backfield, coming off a 2-touchdown game in last week's victory versus the Green Bay Packers. And this week in an indoor ball game, not having to worry with the cold and wet rain or whatever could happen with the weather in New York, obviously. In New Orleans, inside a dome, I think once again Saquon has a big game. Number 5, Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins. So Raheem Mostert, it's been a great season for him. He's been a touchdown machine. Him and Devon Achane have been a nice 1-2 combo for this Miami Dolphin team. And I know this week it's a tougher matchup versus the New York Jets. I think he goes out there and has a good game once again is Raheem Mostert. We saw it a few weeks ago on Black Friday. He found the end zone a couple times in that game. And the Jets, believe it or not, the only hole they've got in their defense is giving up a decent amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. Number 6, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Rachaad White, he's having a great season. And the last month and a half, he's really gone out there and he's making plays for this Tampa Bay Buc team. He could catch the football out of the backfield. In between the tackles, I know the yards per carry haven't been great, but pretty much weekly, he's 15-plus fantasy points. You could pencil him in. And this week at the Packers, that just got shredded by Saquon Barkley. I think he goes out there once again and has a great ball game. Number 7, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Breece Hall having a great season, even though behind the bad offensive line and quarterback problems all season. So Hall last week, one of the best games of the season for him. This week, I know it's a tougher matchup versus the Miami Dolphins, but Derrick Henry just came off a good game as well versus Dolphin team. So I think he could go out there, Breece Hall, have a big ball game. And in my opinion, he's a top 10 running back easily, but obviously the team he plays on and the quarterback and offensive line situation has definitely held him back. Number 8, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So it's been a nice season for Etienne. I know the last few weeks the numbers haven't been up to snuff like they were early in the season, but he's still providing good fantasy numbers. He's a dual threat out of the backfield, could catch the football, and it's a good thing that Trevor Lawrence isn't out, or his value obviously would have took a hit for fantasy owners. But with Lawrence in there, they got to keep a defense honest, and Travis Etienne all season has been putting up numbers. Number 9, Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. So Derrick Henry having a great season for this Tennessee Titan team. A lot of people wrote him off, and I know we get those games some weeks where he don't do much, and then you get games where he scores 2 touchdowns like he has now. 2 out of the last 3 weeks is Derrick Henry. So right here this week in week 15 with a good matchup versus the Texan team that he's owned throughout his career, I think he goes out there once again, Derrick Henry, and has a nice performance. Number 10, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So Bijan Robinson, he's having a pretty solid rookie season in my opinion, considering that Arthur Smith is limited his touches the first month and a half of the season, where Tyler Algier and him pretty much were in a 50-50 split. But the last few weeks, Bijan is getting his opportunities. He's making plays. He's putting up fantasy points. And this week at the Carolina Panthers, obviously the worst team in the league, 1-12, and one of the worst teams, if not versus the run this season. I think Bijan goes out there once again and has a nice ball game. Number 11, Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. So Tony Pollard, he's having a good season and resurgence over the last few weeks. And to be honest, this Cowboy offense, they just didn't have an identity the first 6-7 weeks of the season where nothing was getting done and the offense was snagged in. But the last month and a half here, 2 months for this Cowboy team, they've really gone out there and they're leading the league in points now, and Tony Pollard's putting up fantasy points. Even this week in a tougher matchup at the Buffalo Bills, the workload is there. I know Rico Dotto, some carries as well, but Pollard's still making plays out of the backfield. He's fit into this West Coast offense, and he's healthier as well. We know in the playoffs last season, he broke his ankle in that game, and it was a bad injury versus San Francisco 49ers. With Pollard now, he might be almost close to 100% after coming off the offseason surgery. And this week, he's 11, number 12, Austin Ekeler of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Austin Ekeler, he took off early in the season and put up numbers and was a top 4, top 5 draft pick overall going into the fantasy season. But he really hasn't gotten anything going the last few weeks. And now with Justin Herbert out of the lineup, they're going to load the box, I imagine, here as this Vegas-rated team and have Easton Stick try to beat him. But Austin Ekeler's a dual threat. He's due for a huge ball game. Like I said, he really hasn't done much the last few weeks as Austin Ekeler, where his ceiling's pretty much been 12, 13 fantasy points, and he had a few games stretch in a row where he only had the single-digit fantasy points. So this week at Vegas, I think they're going to make it a point to run the football with this Charger team without Justin Herbert. And Austin Ekeler, we know it just takes one big run and a few good catches for him to have a monster day. 13, Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Joe Mixon right now, his workload's definitely gone up, even though this offense hasn't missed a beat the last 2 weeks with Jake Browning in there, quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengal team. So Jake Browning's playing good football. Joe Mixon getting a huge workload, even though we've seen Chase Brown the last few weeks get at least 8-10 touches and make the most of it for the Cincinnati Bengal team. But like I said, the percentaging of running the football, they're doing more. Joe Mixon, he's been a veteran in this league and playing well. And this week in a pretty decent matchup versus Minnesota. I know they shut out, obviously, this Viking team was a Raider offense, but I don't see it happening in this one. Number 14, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So Jonathan Taylor having a solid season for this Indianapolis Colts team. And the games he did play, and I expect him to return in this one because this Colts team, 7-6, they're on the brink and in the hunt again, the wild card spot. And this is a big ball game versus the Steelers, where both these teams are 7-6. As Zach Moss really hasn't cut it over the last few weeks. Moss definitely could start once again in this game, but the timeline for Taylor was to be out 2 or 3 weeks. And I think this week he comes back in this ball game. Indianapolis home, Saturday game. Pittsburgh's a pretty decent defense, but last week we saw Ezekiel Elliott go out there and have a big game. And I think Jonathan Taylor could put in a solid performance. 15, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So James Cook last week, what a ball game it was for him, no doubt about it, in that nice victory at the Kansas City Chiefs. So this week a tougher matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, one of the better defenses in the league, no doubt about it. But all of a sudden, James Cook, the last few weeks, he's been more of a dual threat than ever with new offensive coordinator in there. So Buffalo's offense is starting to flow. James Cook, they're putting him in space, he's making plays. And versus a good defense like the Cowboys, I think he could go out there and have a solid performance. Number 16, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. So a great matchup versus the Broncos that give up the second most fantasy points to running backs on the season. I know him and Gibbs are 50-50 split. I know Gibbs is more the explosive back. But to me, this feels like a David Montgomery type of game where the Lions get off to an early lead and they have David Montgomery in between the tackles tire out this defense of the Broncos in the second half of the ball game. So right here, David Montgomery is a solid running back. Him and Gibbs, one of the better 1-2 combos in the league. And this week versus the Broncos, I think he has a nice game. Number 17, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Pacheco definitely was missed in last week's loss versus the Buffalo Bills. Pacheco, one of the more physical backs in the league. He finishes off runs, and he just runs over defenders. And this week in the New England Patriots, if he does return in this game, which I expect him to, I think Pacheco goes out there and puts in a big performance. Yes, it is a shoulder injury, but now with a week's rest, I think Pacheco's going to heal up, get going, and they need him in this ball game. I know New England's having a poor season, but they got to get that run game going and get some of the pressure off Mahomes, because these wide receivers just can't make plays this season. Number 18, Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders. So we don't know if Jacobs is going to play in this ball game for the Las Vegas Raiders. Honestly, I think it's going to be a game time call. I know he missed practice early in the week so far as Jacobs with the hip and knee issue, but Josh Jacobs, he don't want to go down for the season here. He wants to keep playing and get that contract number up since he's a free agent after the season, or maybe the Raiders will tag him again. But anyway, this week, I know it's a short week, Thursday Night Football versus the Los Angeles Chargers. I just think Josh Jacobs is going to gut it out and play in this game. And if he doesn't play in this ball game, obviously Zamir White and Amir Abdullah are going to be the running backs, splitting carries most likely in the backfield for this Vegas Raider team, where they'll be running backs as fringe options at that flex or low number 2 options. Number 19, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So Jahmyr Gibbs, it's been a solid rookie season. Already one of the best receiving backs out of the backfield. And this kid's got home run ability. Once he hits that second level, He's just right there of breaking a big one, and last week a shoestring tackle stopped him from having a big 70-yard touchdown. So Jahmyr Gibbs is explosive. This week a good matchup versus the Denver Broncos. But the only thing with me is Gibbs. There's weeks he's getting 20, 23 fantasy points, and then there's weeks 10, 12 fantasy points. It's just on workload, and him getting an opportunity has been the problem, holding him back, splitting with Montgomery this season. Number 20, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. So Devon Achane, he's an explosive rookie as well, like Jahmyr Gibbs. Him and Raheem Mostert, a solid 1-2 combo in the backfield over there for this Miami Dolphin team, and he's one of the quicker running backs in the league. This week, I know it's a tougher matchup versus a good defense of the Jets, but believe it, like I said early in the video, the Jets defense, if they got one hole in it, it's versus the run this season. So Achane, he's an explosive back, good receiver as well, where they've even lined them up at receiver at times out of the backfield and in the slot. So right now, this week versus the Jets, after losing a tough one to the Tennessee Titans, I think Achane gets a decent workload once again and is a solid number 2 back for fantasy owners. 21, Ezekiel Elliott of the New England Patriots. So Ezekiel Elliott, he's gone out there in the last couple weeks where the workload's gone up with Ramondre Stevenson out with his injury. He's gone out there and put up numbers, and he's been a better receiver out of the backfield the last few seasons. Last year with Dallas, he expanded a little, and this season in the few games he's gotten an opportunity is Elliott. He's gone out there and make plays. I know it's a tough matchup with the Kansas City Chiefs, but they want to keep this Chief offense off the field with the young quarterback Bailey Zappe. They're going to run the football a whole lot and a lot of dump-offs as well, like we saw last week versus the Steelers. So Ezekiel Elliott, just on volume alone, works his way into a number 2 running back conversation. 22, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. So Brian Robinson, he's having a solid season. I know he's not 100% with the hamstring injury, but coming off a bye and going indoors in Los Angeles, I think he's going to play in this game. And he's even improved as a receiver over the last few weeks here, where he's got a game under his belt, over 100 yards. So right now, he's doing it all as Brian Robinson. We know Antonio Gibson's still part of the backfield, but he's more lining up as a receiver and in there on passing downs, if anything. So Robinson, once again, with volume, will have good opportunities. 23, DeAndre Swift of the Philadelphia Eagles. So DeAndre Swift, he was off to a roaring start the first 6-7 weeks of the year, but he's really slowed down, and teams are really figuring out how to guard this Philly offense, especially the last 2 weeks. The 49ers held their offense down, and the Dallas Cowboys held their offense down. Both ball games under 20 points. So right now, DeAndre Swift, he's not catching the football a lot out of the backfield, surprisingly, and he's been getting stuffed. And this week in a matchup of the Seattle Seahawks, where their run defense isn't that good, I think DeAndre Swift could bounce back, but also it could go the other way, where this Eagle team gets pass happy and gets that pass game back on track. 24, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So Javonte Williams, he's had a solid season with this Bronco team, coming off the ACL last year, and he's come back healthy, and he's played all the ball games as Javonte Williams. I know he's not the passing downs back for this Denver Bronco team. They got Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin, but he's still going out there. He's making plays as Javonte Williams. He still could catch the football if you need him to. And this week at Detroit, it's possibly a game where Detroit gets off to an early start and the Broncos have to abandon the run with Javonte Williams. But weekly, at worst, he's a number 2 to flex option. 25, Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. So Jerome Ford, pretty solid matchup this week with the Chicago Bears coming to town. Ford, we know, could catch the football out of the backfield. At this point of his career, he's more of an explosive running back than a Kareem Hunt, who's more of a short yardage and change of pace guy when Ford needs a rest. And Ford's filled in very nicely for Chubb. So this week with a good matchup and his receiving prowess, even though I know he's not 100% coming as Jerome Ford, I think he has a solid week again. 26, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. So James Conner a few weeks ago versus the Steelers in Week 13. He had a nice ball game in that one versus former team, and he stuck it to them with that surprising victory for the Cardinals. So Conner, tough matchup, no doubt about it, this week versus San Francisco. I know Conner's numbers weren't all that great until that Steelers game when he returned from injury, where he failed to reach double-digit fantasy points. And this week versus San Francisco, I think it's going to be tough sledding, but he's another running back that gets 85% of the touches over there. 27, Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers. So Aaron Jones, he's been out pretty much the whole season. We've seen him in a handful of games only, with the hamstring injury nagging on and off this year. Aaron Jones, we know, is an explosive running back. We know he can catch the football out of the backfield. One of the better guys in the league in doing that. And this week in a matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where after coming off a bad loss, this Packer team, if they want any hopes of winning, getting into the playoffs, they pretty much got to win 3 out of 4 their ball games. So this week, I think Aaron Jones returns Maybe they didn't want him playing on a short week on Monday night and then coming back Sunday, so they just gave him that Monday night game off and gearing him up for the last 4 games of the year. So if he does play in this game, it's a decent matchup versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where their run defense really hasn't been all that great this season. 28, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks got off to a nice start, but with injuries nagging over the last few weeks, and Zach Charbonnet really eating into that workload, and almost a 50-50 split. Kenneth Walker is nothing more than a low 2-end back or flex option. No doubt about it, he could break away one and have a big ball game. But this week in a tough matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles, I know in the passing game they're getting torched, but in the run game, running backs really haven't had much success versus this Eagle team. So Kenneth Walker, once again, with a split and a tough matchup, I don't see him doing much in this game. 29, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Jaylen Warren, it's been a solid season for him. Like I've said many times this year, more explosive back, quicker back, and better receiving back out of the backfield than Najee Harris. And this week in a matchup in Indianapolis, an indoor game, which is always a plus instead of playing in that cold Heinz Field weather at this time of the year in December. I think Jaylen Warren could go in there, have a good ball game, have a bounce back. After the last 2 weeks, the numbers really haven't been there for him. Number 30, Ty Chandler, the Minnesota Vikings. So Ty Chandler, I think he's going to start in this game. Alexander Mattison banged up, and Alexander Mattison, he's avoided major injuries this season, but this week it's a shortened week a little bit. Saturday football at the Cincinnati Bengals, and Ty Chandler, better receiver out of the backfield, more yards per carry than Alexander Mattison, even though I know it's a smaller sample size, and he fits this offense better, I believe. So Ty Chandler this week as a number 2 back flex option, I think is solid for fantasy owners. Number 31, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. So Chuba Hubbard, he's been solid the last 2 out of 3 weeks. I know this offense really don't bring much to the table, but this week here in the division matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons, I think Chuba Hubbard could go out there and have a good ball game for this Carolina Panther team, where the workload will be anywhere from 12 to 18 touch range. I know Miles Sanders is still back there, and he looked pretty decent, believe it or not, last week, but Chuba Hubbard's still getting the touches, and he's a better receiver out of the backfield. Where after pass, Hubbard will be in there over Sanders. 32, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So pretty much Harris, he's been a touchdown-dependent running back for the majority of the season. In the last few weeks, this run game hasn't done much. This week, it's a middle-of-the-pack matchup at the Indianapolis Colts, where both teams are similar in ways. It's a pretty even matchup, 7-6 on the season. I know the Colts offense a little better than this Pittsburgh Steelers team, but Najee Harris, I still think, is going to get a decent workload. Mitchell Trubisky, they don't want him throwing the football 30, 35 times if they could avoid it, is Pittsburgh. And this week here, I think Harris, once again, a low-end option. 33, Deonta Foreman of the Chicago Bears. So Foreman led the backfield in touches for this Bear team, where Khalil Herbert in last week's game only had 3 touches, and Roschon Johnson wasn't really a factor. So this week in a matchup at the Cleveland Browns, it's a tough matchup, no doubt about it. Browns, one of the tougher defenses in the league, and Deonta Foreman, if they're trailing early and often, that's when the workload really wouldn't be there. So right now, Foreman's getting work, but he's not really a running back in a tough matchup, especially the first week of the playoffs for most fantasy owners that I could trust in this one. Number 34, Devin Singletary of the Houston Texans. So Devin Singletary, it's been an up and down year for him, but last week I thought Dameon Pierce was going to get back in the mix of things and touch the football, but pretty much it was all Singletary getting 70% of the touches in that game and finding the end zone at the New York Jets. So this week a tougher matchup versus the Tennessee Titans. Believe it or not, this Titan team, they've shut down a lot of run games this season besides the Miami Dolphins in last week's game. But that's the exception when you got 2 backs like Mostert and Devon Achane. So this week I don't see Singletary doing much. And if C.J. Stroud is not playing in this game, Tennessee's going to load the box and try to make Davis Mills beat him, which is another factor as well. So Singletary, I don't really have much hope he's going to have a nice game. And he's more of a flex option this week. 35, Keaton Mitchell of the Baltimore Ravens. So Gus Edwards, his workload's gone down over the last few weeks. And I've been saying it for weeks with Edwards as well. If he's not scoring a touchdown, he's not putting up fantasy points. And Keaton Mitchell at this point is the more explosive back, more game-breaking type of running back as well for this Baltimore Raven team. And he fits this offense well with the read play option and Lamar's running ability to open up different things and using Keaton Mitchell in different ways. So this week at Jacksonville, I still believe it's going to be about a 50-50 split between Edwards and Mitchell. If Mitchell ever got a bigger workload, he's a running back with top 15, top 20 potential. But this week at Jacksonville, I think it's going to be a grinded out type of ball game. And the 36th and final running back I'm ranking, Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. Zach Charbonnet in his rookie year, he's been pretty all right. And right now he's splitting the backfield over here with Kenneth Walker over the last few weeks. But both these running backs really haven't done much over the last few weeks. I know Charbonnet, he had a decent amount of touches and decent ball games when he had the workload versus San Francisco and the Dallas Cowboys previous weeks. But last week, it was pretty much a 50-50 split. And with a tough matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles, like I said earlier, him and Kenneth Walker, I don't see doing much in this game. And if the Eagles do get off to a good start and an early lead, I think Seattle's going to be one-dimensional and have to throw. So this week with a tougher matchup, he's more of a flex option as well. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.